Welcome to the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. I'm your host, Kate Powell. In a world where humans who feel vibrant, whole, and fully alive seem to be increasingly rare, where burnout and brokenness seem to be increasingly the norm, both in individuals and our larger ecosystems, it seems worth exploring how did we get here? And more importantly, what perspectives or what cultural practices or what spiritual, ancestral, or animist wisdom processes might help us stay true to the spark and rhythm of our aliveness on this wild, heartbreaking, but ultimately rare and precious life. Thank you for being here. May these conversations help us to stay human in the face of dehumanizing forces. May they nourish our wild, tender hearts, and may they plant seeds which flourish into a more regenerative and vibrant future. Hey, Kate here with Wild Sacred Journey. So these burn it all down or die moments, right? Most of us have had them to greater or lesser extents. And these moments are actually really precious. Part of why I talk about them a lot is that I think these moments are actually really pivotal, precious moments because they're a moment when our soul, some deeper truth about who we are, is crying out for us to come back into alignment. So they're a moment where if we can use it properly, we can kind of look at where have I been either living by someone else's rules or someone else's expectations, or where have I been living by something that was true for me at one point in time and is no longer true for me, right? So it's a way of keeping us alive. It's a way of keeping us, it's a moment that can keep us alive and fresh. And, they're depending on maybe your personality, maybe your design, maybe your experiences in life, you might have had more of a tendency to burn it down and run, or you might have had more of a tendency to just kind of freeze, sacrifice, die basically in some way. Or you might have some combination of both. But we reach a point in our lives where we realize that the running is too costly, the burning it all down and starting over again all the time is too costly. And we also realize that the sacrificing ourselves, those thousands and millions of little deaths, not the generative death, birth, rebirth, cycles, but the sacrificial, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, those slow, agonizing soul deaths, right? That those are also too costly. So the trick in this moment, I think one of the main tricks in this moment is to navigate the sense of urgency. Because usually by the time we've reached that threshold of, oh my God, burn it all down or die, the warning signs that something isn't aligned have been there for a while. So by the time we reach that threshold, it feels so urgent, usually, which is part of why we end up making these really dramatic gestures in those moments often. And so the thing about urgency is actually a sign that there's a lot of charge that's been building up in our system. It's usually some kind of fight or flight charge in that kind of case. So that's part of why we want to burn it all down and run, right? Or if we don't have anywhere for that charge to go, that's when our system shuts down, collapses. It's like a breaker switch, so that instead of burning out, we shut down, right? So that's part of where that sense of I can either fight, run, or die comes in, right? And there's a truth to that. The trick is usually when we meet urgency with discipline and deadline, right? That's usually how we've been taught to approach. Okay, something's wrong. It feels really urgent. What do I need to do, right? And how can I do it as quickly as possible? And what do I, we go all in on something, right? And often it's because there's also a pain in that moment. We just want the pain to go. We want the pain to feel better, right? So but in that moment, it's like we're standing at a crossroads and we can only see two directions, right? But it's actually there's multiple roads. It's really a hub, actually, but or at least a T junction, but we're only seeing the trajectory. We're only seeing the either or. continue as we are, or go the opposite direction, right? And we don't see in that moment that there's a third path. And the reason we can't see that there's a third path in that moment is the urgency. Because urgency is actually a focusing and a narrowing, which aligns perfectly with that fight or flight. That is a normal part of that response, right? We kind of put blinders on. What is the problem? We narrow in on it. We push, right? Or we just get really still and really focused. When we do that, we're literally narrowing our gaze, and we're also dampening any creative energy. What we are doing in that moment is we're putting ourselves into survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, we don't have the same access to creativity. We're in response mode, not generative mode. So one of the first most important steps, as counterintuitive as it feels, is to actually back off the pressure. So that's when we need to slow down, pause, widen our gaze, and create some space. Creating space might look like a lot of different things. It's going to be somewhat unique to each person based on where the most constriction, the most urgency, the most life-draining urgency in your life is in that moment. So if it's finances, you're going to need to create some, financial space. If it's your schedule, like you literally don't have a moment to sit down and breathe, you're going to need to create some scheduling space. If it's, relational dynamics, you might need to go on a little solo vacation, or, carve out some time in the day, or go leave the house, or, go somewhere sometimes, or just carve out some time in the day that is just yours, no interruptions, right? You might also need to create internal space. You've probably been filled up with a lot of voices that aren't your own. You may have old versions of yourself kind of building up. I mean, it's like every time a tree sheds its leaves in autumn, it's the same with us. We shed these old versions of ourselves. Every choice we make, another potential self version of us is a leaf that falls, right? The ones that are counter to the choice that we've made. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of being alive. But it means that if we're not tending to the buildup of all of that, if we aren't laying those to rest, if we aren't doing controlled burns, right, it can build up until eventually that's the fuel for then this like wildfire of just like, I either feel like I'm totally suffocating, or I feel like I'm just going to rage out of control and everything's going to burn. And I'm not going to have any discernment or say in like what's burning, what's just shifting, and what's staying, right? So creating space, it's the key. And as much as it feels counterintuitive, as much as it might feel like that's not, usually the space where we need to, the area where we need to create the most space is the one we feel like we have the least options for creating space in. So that's also too where initially we might need some support, because it may be that in that space we're not usually great at being able to see what we need. So we might need someone else to kind of help mirror that back to us. And so that's where hiring a professional of some kind, or reaching out to an accountability buddy or friend, or, but somebody who's not going to project their stuff onto you, somebody who can mirror to you, right? So let me know how this lands. Let me know if you've had experience like this before. I came up with this because I notice when I get to those places, and I tend to be someone who runs a lot, who burns it down and runs. Although I do plenty of self-sacrificing too, or I have in the past. So I notice that that's often when I try to move, it's like, I can take a breath, and I haven't even realized how crowded I've started feeling, like internally and externally, until I get myself into some sort of fresh situation, fresh environment, whatever, give myself permission to put some things down. And so we don't always have the luxury of leaving our lives to do that. So we have to figure out how to do it within the lives we have. And that's the piece, is that I would submit that our third way, that if we're in that burn it all down or die, keep going the direction I've always gone and suffer the consequences of that, or go the opposite direction and suffer the consequences of that, I would offer that that third way is feeling alive in the lives that we have. And that's really some of our deepest work as humans, and as maturing humans, as humans who want to become elders, perhaps become somebody living a meaningful, beautiful life for all the days that we're here. So let me know how this lands. And if this really resonates with you, and you know somebody who's kind of also in a space like that in their life, and you think it might resonate with them, like, please share it with them. But yeah, I'm hoping to have some more offerings coming out soon, specifically talking a little bit more about creating space, and then also, working through some of these other things. Just a quick re-recorded interjection here. So I have, if you want to go a little bit deeper into some direct coaching or engagement with me around this topic, Wisdom Wednesdays is a great place to do that. So that happens monthly on the first Wednesday, and you can find more information on my website about that. It's pay what you can, but you'd be most welcome there. And that's a great way to sort of start to say, wow, there's something in this conversation that's leaving me with more questions, or just wanting to engage a little bit deeper with me and kind of what you've heard about my perspective on the subject. The other thing too, September 2024, which is when this episode is coming out, we're enrolling the second cohort for Sanctuary, which is 6 months of sort of spacious, low urgency monthly gathering. And so it's not really an offering that will move the needle on getting you more space, or on really making some kind of intentional traction in this burn it all down or die, kind of like in that finding the middle way of like feeling alive in the life that you have. It's not necessarily geared towards the journey or the process of getting there, but it is modeled with the intention of the spaciousness and kind of a more rhythmic approach to life and to aliveness. So it is, the model of it is developed around that. So, it's a place to connect, low pressure, come as you are. A lot of people say, past participants have said it's really beautiful way to connect heart to heart with other people, and to just be in soulful, alive, cultural, like kind of culture spaces that are that feel very different from what we're used to. So it might not move the needle in dramatic ways, in really intentional dramatic ways, but it might also feel like a pretty significant little something in terms of like a nourishment or something like that. So for most of the month of September, we'll be enrolling the next round of that. So if that speaks to you, it would be lovely to have you there too. You can find out more about that on my website as well. But I think this is just such a key moment. And so I'd love to hear if this is a moment that resonates for you, and if this idea of creating space, how that resonates for you, and what questions you might have in that moment, or what challenges you might have in that moment. Because if I can kind of help support you in that moment, then that would be amazing. So, I'll see you next time.